G'day guys, Clint here at the farm. Welcome back to the channel. One thing that we like to do on the farm to sustain self-sufficiency is brew our own beer. And what we have behind me here is the farm's microbrewery. And this microbrewery is a little bit different to the way most home brewers would brew their beer. This is actually like brewing in a real brewery but on a small scale. So what we brew here is a crisp, clean 5 to 5.5% lager. It's a nice drop. And I'm going to show you through the process today. I'm going to run you through what we do bit by bit to make the first step. And so what we're going to do here is we brew it all from scratch. And to do that, we've got to start with grain. And we're going to mill it and boil it. And we're going to create the first step of the brewing process, which is called creating the wort. Well, wort. And here we have a sample of what wort is. Wort is basically a sugary water that gets extracted from wheat. And because we're brewing beer here as they do in a brewery, just on a micro scale, we start with wheat and we have to mill it and boil it. So that'll be the first step. Once we've milled it and boiled it, we'll strain it, and wort is what we end up with. That's the product we then add our yeast to and create the beer from. So today we'll be creating wort. So stick around, let me show you the next step. So the next step of the process is getting the boiler set up. Once we get the boiler set up, we want to fill it up with 40 litres of water and get it on the boil. So we use tank water here. It's basically, well, it's untreated, unchemicalized, and that means there could be the odd little bacteria or something that might get in there and it could turn the beer sour or put the yeast off. So what we want to do is boil all that away, make sure we have 100% clean water, and the brew and the beer that we've made here so far has been crisp and clean. So I mean, using boiled rainwater has been a godsend for the flavour. And today we'll start with the boil. So I'll get that set up for you now on camera and just show you what's involved in the boiler. I want to set it up in a nice level area I have a little attachment up here, which is just a strap that's attached to one of the rafters. And that's going to be for a little ratchet to sit above our boiler for when we need to pull out the wheat bag. So this is our boiler, has some elements inside and a tap at the bottom. Now this has two elements inside of it. I won't plug it in yet. It has two elements inside of it. We could plug them both in. However, it does trip the system here. They are both a kilowatt each, the elements inside here. Basically elements out of kettles and stuff though. When they're run consistently, they're drawing a lot of power to boil the water, especially 40 litres. The reason why I've got it up on a milk crate is because I want the tap high enough off the ground. So once the boil's done and we've made the wort, we can empty the wort into some sanitised wort bags. And to do that, you want to be able to have a little bit of distance between the ground and the tap. So I'm going to fill this up now with around 40 litres of water, and we'll get the boil on. Right, so the way we're going to know that we have 40 litres of water in here is due to measurement. We worked it out, and 40 litres is 20 centimetres down from the top. So once the water reaches that level, we'll get the boil on and we'll do the next step. Alright, as we fill this up, once it gets over the top of the element, we're going to want to plug it in so we can start the boil as we're filling. Plug the element in now. So 40 litres will be 20 centimetres down from the top. And we want to put a temperature gauge in there, which is going to be one of the digital temperature gauges from the top of the fermentation fridge over there. And we're going to drop that in and make sure that we get it up to 70 degrees for the first step of the next process. In the meantime, we'll grind some grain. Rightio. Okay, now just to help that along and get up to temperature faster, put the lid on. The next step we're going to do is set up our temperature gauge. This is the digital temperature gauge / temperature controller. So we'll put the probe into the water, just off to the side of the element. And then get this plugged in. Get that running. Right, so that's set up. We're running at 23.2 degrees and climbing. (23.5), 23.6. So we'll monitor that. Okay guys, so while we wait for the boiler here to get up to 70 degrees Celsius, what we want to do now is mill our grain, and this is the first step to making the wort. What we have here is our mill, just set up on a bit of ply, hole in the bottom, gets milled in through the chute, and comes out the bottom into this empty bucket I have set up in the middle. Empty bucket here, ready to catch what we need to boil. So we'll set the mill up over that. This is a drill-driven mill. It's got my cordless drill here. We'll set that up on the chuck. Alright, got our drill set up. So now what we want to do is fill the hopper up, fill the chute up with this grain. I'll bring the grain over and give you a look. So this comes in a sack. I divide it into buckets because I know how much I need for each brew. So that's just malted grain. And there we have our milled grain ready for our boil. Just all crushed now. All the sugars inside are opened up and been released. Now we're up to 43 degrees Celsius on the boil, and we're going to get up to 70. So the good thing about brewing beer, and maybe this will be something that allow the missus allow you to do it, is you can get jobs done in the meantime. Before we milled this grain, and we're waiting for the boil to start, I went and did a load of washing. I've got another load in there now. So we'll come back when it's 70 degrees and we'll do the next step. Now what we've got to do is pour that inside the boiler, inside a Hessian bag, which is sitting on top of the grain bucket there. So what we need to do is, when that's full of water, it's quite heavy and want to be able to hoist it out. So I have a small little block and tackle, just using a rope and a little plastic ratchet clicker that will mount up above the boiler, where I have this strap that I mentioned when we first started. Now that's going to give us the ability to drain the Hessian bag and get all the nutrient and sugar water out of it. Okay guys, we're up to the next step. We're almost up to 70 degrees. We're at 69.4. So what we've got to do now is, once we reach 70 degrees, switch off the temperature, insert the Hessian bag, pour in and mix in the grain, add a couple of little additives, and then we're going to let it sit for another hour. So I've managed to do 2 loads of washing so far and water the plants with the grey water from the washing around the house. Boys, don't ever let your partner tell you you can't do this. It makes you productive. So we've just hit 70 degrees there. We'll unplug the power, lid off. We'll get our Hessian bag here. want to open this up and drop it in there without knocking the temperature gauge in too far, and fit it over the top. We'll get our stirrer, nice little aluminium spade, which we're going to use for stirring in the grain, ensuring we don't have lumps in it. We've got our Hessian bag on our cooker, and we just want to wait for that temperature now to drop down to 65 degrees. Once we get it down to 65, we'll pour our grain in from our bucket. Use our stainless steel spade there, and we'll mix it in. Make sure we've got no lumps and that the water is distributing evenly through the milled grain. We do have a couple of additives we need to add to the grain. A teaspoon calcium chloride and a teaspoon of calcium sulfate. So let's get that grain in. That grain's going to help it drop temperature as we put that in as well. It's already down to 68. Smells nice. Just pouring it in and slowly trying to get the water to mix into it as best you can. You want it to get water through the whole grain. You don't want any dry lumps in there. So with the grain, it comes in 25 kilogram sacks, and to make a keg of beer, we split that sack into three 8.3 kilogram lots into buckets, and then that's what I just use one whole bucket for for one brew, which is one keg, which creates around 100-120 beers, and yeah, I think it's a lot better way to know what you're drinking and not have to pay the exorbitant taxes that are used on alcohol anyway. So I'm just stirring that in, making sure that all the grain is sort of soaking in the water and not in dry lumps in the bottom of the sack. That temperature's dropped down now to 67, so by the time I've done this bit, it should be down to about 65, which will be perfect. So that's mixing in now, that's pretty good. It looks like when you're making muesli, when you're boiling it. That's what it looks like. It smells a little bit nice too, sweet. Okay. Next step, put in 1 teaspoon of calcium chloride. Now, I'm a fairly new brewer. This is the 4th time I've ever done this. But there we go, 1 teaspoon of that calcium chloride. What it says it does is lowers pH, adds water hardness, and chloride accentuates maltness, sweetness, and fullness. So there you go. That's what sodium chloride, which is pickle crisp, adds to the beer. Calcium sulfate, 1 teaspoon of this. And calcium sulfate also lowers the pH. It's useful for adding calcium if the water is low in sulfate. It can be used to add sulfate crispness to the hop bitterness. Used to add permanent hardness to brewing water. So there you go. And it's most often used in British style beers when your water is soft. Hence my rainwater tanks. Right, now we've added those two calciums, we want to stir them in, make sure they're nice and evenly spread throughout here as well. I'm going to get ready and put that lid back on because we're down to 62 now, so we bypass that 65. And what we're going to do is let that soak for a good hour from right now onwards. So we're going to set a timer on our phone and with an alarm, and we can go off and do some more chores. Keep the partner happy, while we brew up the goodness. Oh yeah, that's all mixed in. Put that lid back on. And that's it. I'll wash up as I go. Catch you guys soon. Okay guys, it's been 1 hour now. We've had it soaking with our grain inside the Hessian sack. Now I'm shirtless for a few reasons. Pardon me. During the break I was mowing lawns and blowing balconies off and put a load of whites out on the line as well, so I was all dirty and I wanted to make sure I didn't dirty the whites. I'm also hot. And the next job involves draining the grain out of the Hessian bag, topping it up and getting it ready for boil again. And we want to bring it up to 100 degrees this time and boil it. Now, when you do the Hessian bag, especially by yourself, you're going to get, you know, a lot of the sticky sort of moisture, liquidy stuff on you when you're trying to squeeze out the bag. So I didn't want that in my clothes. I'll take the lid off, putting that condensation from the lid back into the grain. Give our grain just another stir. Let's get that water right through it. I go around just wishing it up from the bottom, trying to get it all to circulate from the bottom to the top. Right. Fun part. Right, we want to lower our hook down a bit. I don't know. A touch more. We're going to pull up our bag. Attach our bag handles to our carabiner hook. Now the water is still pretty warm, it's about 50 degrees, so when you're doing this it will be hot. If it gets too hot for me, I'm going to put some gloves on. We'll see how we go. Rightio, so we've got our Hessian bag, I'm going to hoist that up. We're just going to let that drain back into the bottom out of the bag. Let as much of that come out as naturally possible. Then we've got to squeeze the rest. I'm going to take off one of the bag hooks. I'm going to hose inside there and hose out any more of the excess sugar water that might be trapped inside the grain. So now we've got our bag unhooked. Just want to get the hose and hose off the grain. Try and get some fresh water to wash through the grain and wash all the sugar water out the bottom. Okay, now we've squeezed all that out and we've got most of what we can out of that. That washed grain, soaked grain, is going to go to the chickens and it'll be chicken feed. Push that to the side and let it cool before it goes to the chickens. That water's a little bit sticky, sugar water. So the next step after we've drained all the grain is to put the lid back on and put the power back on and get it up to boil. Now before we put the lid on, to ensure we have enough to ferment a full keg, we want to add we want to make it 50 litres, so we need to do it 10 centimetres down from the top, and we just add that water in, fresh tank water, And bring that all the way up to 10 centimeters from the top, giving us 50 liters. You want to get as much sugar water in there as possible before you do this step, because the more water you put in, the less alcohol you'll have. So now we have it on its way back up to boil. This is what our grain soaked sugary water looks like. And we've got to add an additive shortly, which I'll show you the next step. And this is our leftover grain that's now going to be recycled into chicken feed. It's all soaked. They love it. It's like a treat for them. There's 8 kilos of it there for them. About 18 chickens, so they get a fair bit each. Alright, so the next step is we've got to add in 1 kilogram of dextrose, and we'll stir this in. It's only at 50, nearly 52 degrees now. Push this to the side for a sec. Just want to stir that in, dissolve it. Alright, so that's nicely stirred in. So we're back down to 51 degrees. We'll come back when we've reached 100. We've got it on boil, and we've got the next step to do. Right, while we wait for that to boil, and the grain here is cooled down, so we might go give it to the chickens and see how they like their treat. Righto guys, here we are in Chicken Town. They're itching for their treat. You watch this. Get it. Byproduct not wasted. Right, so while we wait for that to come up to boil, we've got to get the next step prepared. And the next step is we've got to add in 20 grams of hops and some yeast nutrient, which is a tablespoon of that. And the hops are there to, you know, give the beer its aroma and its bitterness and some flavour. And it also helps it, you know, last longer and sustain a better head. So hops time. All right, I'll show you what we've got to do. We've got to measure that out. Right, so we've got our zeroed container on our scales here. We've got our hops here in this bag. And we've got our yeast nutrient with tablespoon, which we're going to add in later. So we'll get this up to 20 grams of hops. So you know as well, we're using Magnum hops. It's $10 for 100 grams. There we have it. There's our 20 grams of hops and our yeast nutrient here. And once we get it up to boil, we'll stir that in and we'll let that boil for 50 minutes. So you can see there by the temperature gauge, so we're nearly there. Oh, that's beautiful. It smells so good. Oh, you got frosted up. Look at that. Okay, so we've got our hops here. So pour that in. Give the container a shape, put the lid back on. And of course, the last thing we need to add is a tablespoon of yeast nutrient. Just this yellowy powder here. So that's what our boiling mix looks like for now. So next step is that we're going to drop in a flock tablet and let that boil for another 10 more minutes. Righto guys, so we have the one well flock tablet that we're going to put in there, close up to the cameras. That's going to weigh down the particles inside. We've got to boil that for 10 minutes. Oh, smells great. Right, so the boil's finished now. We're going to unplug it. We're going to take the lid off. We're going to give it a spin inside, help all the heavy particles spin to the center, and then give us a nice, clear, evacuated liquid from this tap here. So we'll turn that boil off, pulling the power cord out and winding it up and cleaning as we go, especially with power around liquids. Now what we need to have ready is our 2 Wort bags. That's what the liquid is put into. They're sanitized, they're sealed shut, they're airtight. So when we put the liquid in, it'll be hot and it'll be sanitized, and it'll go in there and fill up, and we'll push the air out and seal it so there's no air or any bacteria or anything in there that can affect it as it cools. Next thing we're going to need is 2 milk crates, 1 for each bag, to hold the weight of the bag and the liquid from expanding out. And we'll have them ready. And then we've also got a rubber tube inside our little soaker over there that we need to use, and we also need to sanitize. So here we have pre-made sanitizer solution. It's water and sanitizer in one. Now that that's been cleaned with keg cleaner, we're going to sanitize the outside, sanitize the inside. That'll kill any bacteria. Here we are 10 minutes later, and we'll have a look. Yep, she looks like she's all flocked down for the most part anyway. Put the lid aside. Alright, so what we're going to do is we're going to be filling up our Wort bags. This is fresh Wort coming out of here. We're going to keep it sanitized. So these Wort bags are basically just like a bladder, and we're just filling it full of Wort and pushing the air out, so there's no air in there at all to affect it as it cools. So now we just want to put the lid on that once we've pushed all the air out. Seal that in, and it becomes basically suctioned, so there's no air in there. And that bladder will cool overnight in the crate, just to protect the bag. And then we'll pour that tomorrow into the keg for fermenting. So we'll get the second one going. Whew. Well, it's now 5 o'clock at night nearly, and we've just finished the Wort. I'll give you a look at what that looks like shortly, but in the meantime, I've got to wash up the pot. So this is what our Wort looks like. Just a pillowcase full of liquid, browny, sugary, sweet, sticky liquid. Just like a goon bag. Alright, good job everybody. That'll give us around 100-120 beers in the next 3 weeks. Next steps tomorrow. Good night everybody.